about an early phase in your career when you were working with Barbara Castle, and you helped to organise the No campaign in the referendum of 1975 on membership of the EC, which is a very interesting part of the talk. 40 years on, an awful lot has changed, but there's a debate once again raging in this country about whether the UK should remain a member of the EU and under what circumstances, what should be the relationship. I'd like to ask you, how would you view that in the light of all your experience looking forward? What's your view on that today?
Yeah, my track record of campaigning and referendum has not been very good. I gave but really giving you the result in the Gibraltar referendum. But the 1975 referendum, the No campaign defeated by a margin of 2 to 1. Anyway, very interesting result, by the way, because in the months leading up to the referendum, the opinion polls suggested that the No campaign would win. But once people got close to making a decision about their future and whether they wanted the status quo or change the status quo, they decided that it was too dangerous to go for a speculative strategy of leaving the EU, and it was too late to adopt a different trajectory for the United Kingdom. I'm unapologetic about the decision I took then, but my view now, 4 years on, is the country made a decision. May not have been the one I wanted, but they made the decision, and 4 years on, it would be crazy for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. So that's just to reassure you that should I be tapped on the shoulder and be invited to be Prime Minister, you still have a job. See what on both counts. I also just, part of the strategy that we were embarked on in government, with broad support from the Conservatives, certainly, was to expand the European Union, and as it were, to widen it rather than deepen it, which is why Tony Blair particularly was in the lead, in the vanguard, of trying to ensure that the Eastern European states came into the EU, the southeastern European states like Bulgaria and Romania, and also why there's been a bipartisan consensus in the United Kingdom on trying to get Turkey into the EU, and I'm chairman of the British government-backed British-Turkish Forum. My view is that strategy is right, but what we do is to widen the European Union so that the European Union's activities as a trading partnership are expanded, and as a union of values. And the most important benefits of the EU have been the avoidance of war in Europe, on the continent where more people have been killed ever in the history of the world, which is Europe, in the lifetime of some people, certainly in this room, and certainly my parents. And secondly, to extend democratic values to post-Copenhagen. So that's the value of the European Union, that's what I would fight for. What the European Union is only gradually, dimly realising is that it will sacrifice those really important benefits if it carries on gratuitously interfering in things which should be left to nation states. I mean, frankly, you can't possibly argue that whether electronic cigarettes are available in a pharmacy or in a corner shop is a matter for the European Union. It is simply crazy. Now, I'm very interested, I don't smoke electronic cigarettes. I'm not quite certain about the efficacy. There is a company that makes electronic cigarettes in Blackburn, and some people work there, but you can see this issue cuts both ways. But leave it to the sense of the German Parliament, the Danish Parliament, the British Parliament. What is it to do, please, with the far less undemocratic institutions like the European Commission and a pretty ludicrous European Parliament. If you ask me what reform I make a serious point of it, what is the one reform I introduced to make the European Union more democratic, is to abolish the direct elections to the European Parliament. So you'd have the European Parliament having been an assembly of national parliamentarians, much more sensible. There is a profound conceit that there is some kind of European polity which is represented in the European Parliament, and it's not. And I've never met a more detached group of people claiming to be politicians than members of the European Parliament, of all persuasions and of all nations.
People were invited to submit questions. A question here from John Cox of C&D Company. Prior to the invasion of Iraq, the British government was warned of a likely devastating effect on the 1.3 million Christians living there. There are now fewer than 300,000 Christians remaining. Could you explain why those warnings were ignored, and if civil servants indeed advised to ignore those warnings, have they remained as advisors or have they been dismissed?
Well, I'm quite certain that if that advice was given, that those people would remain as advisors. I'm not aware, Mr. Cox, I don't mean to say that the advice was not given, but I don't have a recollection of this advice. We were certainly concerned, to be sure, that there was stability in Iraq after the military invasion, and that just goes back to the point that I was making earlier, that we went to very great lengths with the United States State Department to develop a plan which they were leading for an orderly transition once the regime had been removed. And I explained why that didn't happen, and the catastrophe report happened, both in my book and as elsewhere. So it wasn't that they were ignored. What was the case, and the realisation of the dysfunctionality of the Bush administration, well, it came slowly because some of the details were kept even from the closest ally of the United States. But I certainly didn't appreciate the full abject level of their dysfunctionality in the sense until it was too late. So that's what has happened to the Christian community in Iraq is a tragedy. But it was also one of the reasons, and many, why the House of Commons hesitated to take military action in Syria, because one of the ironies of the situation is that the Assad regime, unpleasant though it is, has been the protectors of the Christians in Syria rather than their antagonists.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Can I clarify the Can I just, I'm John Cox.
Sure.
This question. Can I clarify that at the time I was approached by a number of Iraqis who were all anti-Saddam and from the Christian community, and I wrote a letter to you personally. I received a reply which had something which might have been your signature. It said something like, the minister says that your fears are unfounded. And that was sort of it, you see. And so it's not quite a supplementary question because I put in 3 and this is part. They are all 3. I wonder, and many people do, are you as ministers a bit like we see on the programme Yes Prime Minister and Yes Minister, simply a tool of a civil service who are sort of unelected, self-appointed as far as I can make out? Or are you really the one who's taking the decision? Because that letter I received, I can well understand if you don't remember exactly whether you signed or not at this stage, wouldn't expect to. But I'm really not confident that what we have in Britain is government by politicians at all. And I get the feeling that we slide into these things because there is an establishment of a particular point of view, and it goes on from there. I've had my...
Okay, thank you. Well, if you ever went to me afterwards, I'd be really interested to see that exchange of correspondence. And I'll then send you an exegesis about whether I did sign it. I'll end up, if it was my signature, I suspect it probably wasn't, particularly if it referred to me in the third person. So then calling out to people, referring to myself in the third person. The pompous I can do from time to time, I think that's probably a bit much. And in the best world, if you are a senior minister, you can't reply to all the letters that come in. I mean, I could say that I used to turn up when Em was the political director of the Foreign Office every morning and call him into the office and ask him what to think on that day. But it's not the way the relationship works. I've always believed, and I believed it when I worked as a special advisor in the late 70s, but I believed it still more from my experience as a minister, that it is a sign of weakness by ministers if they blame their officials. I mean, there are some things, there are some things which go wrong, which are clearly have not been caused directly by the minister. Say you suddenly go to your Home Secretary, you have a prison breakout. I mean, you haven't ordered prisoners to break out, nor the prison rules to be sleuthful. If no one can get a passport, which is what happened to me, the whole passport system collapsed, causing me some embarrassment. As it happened, I now ordered the passport system to be changed, as that was done by my predecessor, and I ordered it to collapse. But I couldn't go around saying this is somebody else's fault. If you determine a policy, bring forward legislation, it's up to you. You and ministers, we live in a democracy, there are all sorts of checks and balances, but senior ministers have the most extraordinary discretion to say yes or no every day of the week to different propositions. So you have, it's a great privilege, but you are responsible. And of course, there are very strong-minded people like him who, and if you've got a good relationship with someone like him, they'll come in and sometimes appear to you privately and say, I think you've got this wrong, which is what you need. The last thing you need is people just telling you that you're wonderful. I agree with you. Is that what it works?
Don't bring me into this. But I agree with that. Next question, please. Let's take on the left here, please.
Do you think the current elections in Libya and the Arab Spring have been a good thing or a bad thing? Do you think it helped stabilise the region?
Do I think that the current interventions in Libya and the Arab Spring have been a good thing or a bad thing? Well, the only one where we intervened directly is Libya. And I think that overall it's a good thing. I mean, I'm not trying to do the challenge. I think that it's too early to say, but to a degree it is a bit early to say. I mean, inevitably, where you've had an authoritarian regime and it's removed, whether it's by external action, as in part this was, or by internal rebellion or revolution, you don't find that replaced by stability. And the whole history of revolution is that when you remove one regime, there is a period of instability after that, and it's almost inevitable. And that's what's happening in Libya. I mean, I think I've not been closely involved in the government because we've been out of office. I think there are probably errors that have been made on the way, but I think overall it's been a good thing. And in any event, I think that the quick collapse of the Gaddafi regime shows just how unstable that country was anyway and could have terminated. Tunisia is much less turmoil, relatively, I think, straightforward. The Arab Spring has provoked quite beneficial change in Morocco, and it was provoking or pushing further change in Jordan, and they've now got a huge refugee crisis on their hands, which is destabilising. So that's good. Egypt, absolutely a tragedy that the Islamic Muslim Brotherhood didn't get, that if you take power through democratic vote, you've got to spend almost as much time having a care for the people who didn't vote for you as you do for those who did vote for you.
As a lawyer,
question is, how can we redress that, especially in light of the concern that the West, particularly the United Kingdom and the USA, have lost moral ground when it comes to the rule of public international law further to Iraq?
I think, well, the first thing I'd say is to be reasonably optimistic about this. I mean, for those who are not into the interstices of public international law, this is basically law between nations, and it's based fundamentally on custom and practice, but above all on international treaties. And the difference between public international law and private international law, conflict laws, is that there is, for the most part, and certainly on the big questions of war and peace, there is no international court which can both arbitrate and then have its judgments enforced. So it's as much it's done normative and you can work through only through the sort of power of norms, establishing norms, and power of values, rather than in a domestic setting where, by definition, the rule of law ultimately depends on the power of the state to lay hands on people. I think if we take a lot about the development of international law and the international institutions that were established in the wake of the Second World War, I think we can be reasonably optimistic that, notwithstanding some departures from the norms, norms of international behaviour have become much more widely observed. And that's true in terms of people's human rights and democracy, because every country in the world now has to sign up in principle to democracy and human rights. They certainly don't sign up in practice, but they know that they're going to be judged against that. Many dictators now have quite good reason to worry about the International Criminal Court. And one of the proud achievements of the United Kingdom was of one of the drivers and early signatories of the ICC. And in terms of decisions to take military action, the arguments, if you take Syria, for example, or take Iraq, I mean, that was all an argument. I mean, leave aside the underlying case, but the argument took place in the context of international law. Right? I mean, that's why I can recite almost the whole of the text of Resolution 1441, because I got so used to doing it, because it was all about international law. You look at Libya. The argument in the House of Commons was basically about international law. Were we going to get resolutions? We didn't get a resolution. We weren't going to go ahead. And that was self-evidently the case with Syria as well. So, and interestingly, it even had echoes in the United States, which has previously seen itself as rather immune from these arguments and developing a different parallel idea of international law. So I'm reasonably optimistic, and I think that these norms of public international law have reduced the level of violent conflict that otherwise would have taken place.
Thank you. Is there a question on this side, please? Please.
Hi, my name is Akash. I spent my summer this year in Pakistan researching and looking at the effects of basically the invasion of Afghanistan on Afghani refugees living in Pakistan. What effects do you think the invasion of Afghanistan has had on the people who live there and also on the refugees that have been created?
Well, for the most part, the second invasion of Afghanistan, the one that took place in late 2001, led to a repatriation of refugees, because there were hundreds of thousands of refugees on both the eastern border of Afghanistan in Pakistan and on the western border in Iran. And so you saw many of those refugees return. There's no question but I was going to say the first invasion, which was the Soviet invasion in 1979, set in train a series of events which are really the mother and father of the troubles we now have both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. And as you all know, what then happened was that there were refugees fled across the border into Pakistan. They were given safe haven. There were other mujahideen as well in Pakistan. They in turn were trained up by the CIA and to infiltrate back into Afghanistan to fight the Soviets, which they did quite successfully, but they then became the core of a significant part of the military wing of the Taliban, and also were equipped by or via the United States. And it's led to this very unstable and violent relationship between the western border of Pakistan and the eastern border western border of Pakistan and the eastern border of Afghanistan. And the lawlessness you see in the Peshawar area and the other areas on that border. So that's a description. It's not an analysis, but it's as long as both countries remain unstable, you're going to get politics of Afghanistan filtering across the border into Pakistan and vice versa. And then there's a thing we've not talked about this evening on this, but there's also the power that comes from the huge sums that are made through drugs, which you can see going across the border.
Thank you. Next question, please. One at the rear end. Come to you next.
I wonder how concerned are you about what I would consider or I would describe as the divisiveness of Israeli foreign policy. It seems to have an inordinate influence on foreign policy. And I think that the Israeli Prime Minister is actually quite appalled that there may be a rapprochement between America and Iran, because they see it in their interest to almost keep the conflict going. It's a big concern of mine, and I just wonder, as former Foreign Secretary, how would you view how Israel seems to supplant its own foreign policy onto America and the dangers with that?
Thank you. Can we take the other question as well now, please? There's one here. Thank you.
Hi there, Craig Craig, I'm a trustee of the Centre and also involved with Wales for Africa programme, which I was in movement in Wales. Given the recent withdrawal of Gambia from the Commonwealth and the statements around not wanting to be associated with the colonial baggage around, could you give some insight as to what you feel is the most positive role that Britain should be realistically playing in trying to pursue a socially just path of development for looking at sub-Saharan Africa?
Sorry, what was the last end of the sentence? Socially just?
Socially just path for the future for development across sub-Saharan Africa.
Right, on Israel, so I share your concerns about the influence which Israel exercises on the politics of the United States, which then comes back to distort what should be the United States policy in respect to Israel, Palestine, and much else besides. I think, like hopefully everybody here, I support the right of the State of Israel to exist, but within its own borders. And it's got a right to be secure within its own borders. It does not have a right to steal other people's land, which is what it is doing, and that in turn is a destabiliser across the region, but particularly self-evidently within the occupied territories. Why has Israel got this power? Well, for a number of reasons. The United States was an unambiguous campaigner for a state of Israel in the way that the United Kingdom was not, even though we foundation for Israel with the Balfour Declaration in 1917. The second reason is that there is a very large Jewish community across the United States, and part of that is very wealthy. The third is that money equals power in politics in the United States to a degree which is almost impossible to imagine in this country. In this country, what you can spend at an election is constrained. It was constrained before 2000 with under legislation which I introduced. It's highly constrained, both nationally and locally. The maximum is 20 million for each party, and that's, as far as I know, never been reached. What you can spend at a local level is £12,000 during an election campaign, and that's it. And when I explain this to American friends, they simply cannot believe it. There's billions in our spent in the US on elections. And moreover, when I explained that there was a ban on any television ads which are political. If I've spoken in this way in America, the next day, when I was in a marginal seat, the next day there would be television ads paid for by the Israeli lobby saying that I was a very bad man and ought to be removed. And they kept on for long enough and found out enough about me, they'd be able to get rid of me. And that's what happens, you actually see it. So they buy and sell politicians. It makes for real problems for those American politicians who want to speak out. It's very serious indeed. It's been written up, by a couple of Harvard academics. Again, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to the library and get this out, or I'll find a reference, but there's a reference to this word, the power of what's called AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Administration Commission. It's absolutely extraordinary. And that's why they exercise it. Netanyahu, by the way, is an American. He's American, he's also got dual citizenship, he's in Israel. He was educated in America, and if you saw the effort they're helping Trump to get lobbying in the last presidential election, you'd see that he presents himself to a high degree as an American. So, on last question on Britain's role in sub-Saharan Africa, I think our role in sub-Saharan Africa is a pretty honourable one. We are very, very big aid donors. We've got more sophisticated about the use of our aid. And you always get some countries complaining about historical legacy, but we know the people running the British government or British Parliament these days are trying to resurrect Britain's claims of the past. We can't ignore it because it's there, it's a fact of life. But my own sense is that we should carry on more or less doing what we have been doing in terms of aid, but all the time recognising that the absolute two fundamentals if you want to stay in the country. One is living standards, because the higher the living standards in the country, the much less likely they are to be unstable. But the other is governance, rule of law, stable public institutions, and we ought to be focusing on those two. Thank you.
Can we show our appreciation in the usual way, please?